had to have other people tell you that that's not you in the picture? How many blackface pictures did you pose for where you weren't sure if this was one of those blackface pictures or not? Then we see the Attorney General who came out and voluntarily said he posed in blackface years ago because he and his friends were listening to rappers and he was dressed up as Curtis Blow, the rapper, the famous rapper Curtis Blow. So he said he wore blackface, right? So with all this taking place, and then also this past week we saw that Gucci is in trouble because there was a sweater, an $890 sweater that Gucci was advertising on their website. And people called it a blackface sweater because it had a portion of the sweater that pulls up over the lower portion of your face. Kind of like a ski mask, okay? But it's just the lower portion of your face. And around the part that goes around your mouth is outlined in red, which kind of looked like red lips, exaggerated red lips. So you had a lot of people on social media, a lot of African Americans on social media, rightly so, who were turned off by that and offended by it. So Gucci pulled the product off their website and apologized for it, right? But with all this taking place, and we know a month or so ago, Prada got into trouble with blackface as well, one of their products with blackface also. So with all of this taking place, there was a poll that was done, and this poll dealt with blackface, okay? And we'll talk some about that. Atlanta Black Star had an article about a new poll that was done that dealt with Americans' views on blackface. Did they think it was acceptable or not acceptable, and why, etc. A new poll reveals shocking discovery about America's attitude towards blackface. Okay, a new poll reveals a shocking discovery about America's attitude toward blackface. And they found that the research was conducted by YouGov, okay, an organization called YouGov, which is an international internet-based market research company. And it was done February 2nd through February 5th of 2019, amid the growing blackface scandals erupting in the U.S. government and across the U.S. So the poll questioned 1,500 Americans across the country of different races, genders, and party lines. And those polled were asked, quote, is it acceptable or unacceptable for white people to wear blackface makeup? Is it acceptable or unacceptable for white people to wear blackface makeup? Now, remember, just last year, it was Megyn Kelly on NBC who, during a panel discussion, talking about blackface, things like this, and she didn't have, if I remember correctly, she didn't have any African Americans there on that panel. And she said she didn't think there was anything wrong with wearing blackface. She didn't see anything wrong with wearing blackface, something to that effect. Next thing we know, she's out of NBC, right? She shouldn't have been hired at NBC in the first place. Because, see, that pissed off Tamron Hall. That's why Tamron Hall left NBC. So she shouldn't have been hired in the first place, okay? She came from Fox News. NBC was trying to get some of the Fox News watchers, some of the conservative watchers over to NBC. That's what that was all about. So, in this new poll that just came out, the majority of Republicans said they were fine with blackface, with 29% as opposed to only 6% of Democrats, 29% as opposed to only 6% of Democrats coming to that same conclusion. 81% of Democrats found wearing blackface was outright unacceptable, compared to 44% of Republicans who shared the same feeling. So 81% of Democrats polled. There were 1,500 people polled in this survey, okay? 81% of the Democrats surveyed said wearing blackface was outright unacceptable, compared to 44% of Republicans who shared the same feeling. Now, 27% of Republicans were unsure about their feelings on blackface, okay, while 14% of Democrats were not certain, all right? You can check this out at AtlantaBlackStar.com, AtlantaBlackStar.com, and they have the link to the actual poll. So with all this going on, and some people confused about blackface, And then let's be quite clear: a lot of African Americans don't understand don't understand our history either. Okay, a lot of African Americans don't understand the history of slavery. And we know this is African American History Month as well. You know, I've been speaking at a lot of churches. I think this coming Saturday, I'm speaking at 2 churches. Was it 1 church and 2 other places? And I'm speaking at 2 churches this week. So we're going to deal with some of the history of blackface and why it is so offensive. We talked a little bit about this last week. And then also February 8th, this past week, February 8th, was the 104th anniversary of the opening of the movie The Birth of a Nation. The opening of the movie The Birth of a Nation. So we're going to deal with some of the history of the Birth of a Nation, and specifically we'll deal with how African Americans fought back against this movie The Birth of a Nation. Because we had protests against this movie when it came out. It debuted February 8th, 1915. The NAACP led protests against this movie because all the negative stereotypical images of African Americans were depicted in this movie, and most of the African American characters in the movie were white people in blackface. Imagine that. So this is an example of how we see history in the headlines. So we'll deal with some of the history of blackface and why it is so offensive. And then also we'll tie that into the history of the movie The Birth of a Nation, which rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan. If you don't know, I talked about that. What was it? Friday. I was out at Smith Chapel Church in Inkster, Michigan, and we'll share some of that that discussion that took place. In Inkster, Michigan, you know, they have 28 days of African American History Month, 28 days of events celebrating African American History Month, and they're showing the 6-part series over the course of 6 days, Many Rivers to Cross, the African Americans, by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. And I'm leading the discussions after each one of these showings. Okay, so we'll give you information on the next ones because they have a couple coming up this week. So also, Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia, he said he won't resign. Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax denies sexual assault accusations and calls for an FBI investigation. Then there was an article from AtlantaBlackStar.com this past week also that dealt with Blackface Photos reopens a long history of bigotry in medicine. Blackface Photos reopen a long history of bigotry in medicine. Okay? And we know that recently we've heard stories about how African American women died disproportionately during childbirth in hospitals. Okay? And a lot of this has to do with not the fact that it's not because they may be poor. It has to do with a lot of stereotypical views that some doctors have and that have existed for years in medicine when it comes to African Americans, especially African American women. African American women who have multiple degrees, who have money, okay, they can be victimized by this as well. And Serena Williams talked about her story. She's a multimillionaire, and she talks about her story, how she almost died during childbirth and how the doctors did not want to listen to her. Okay? So these stereotypes are wide-ranging. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Okay? Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of white supremacy. And then we're going to, in the last segment of the second hour, we'll fact-check some of Donald Trump's lies that he told during his State of the Union address this past Tuesday. And he only mentioned African Americans twice. Once dealing with prison reform. He had some African Americans there who had were let out of prison. They had their sentences commuted or received a pardon because of the First Step Act. And then also he talked about the lowest unemployment rate of African Americans in history, even though it's gone back up. He doesn't talk about that. And he doesn't talk about why it's usually double that of the white unemployment rate. He doesn't even get into that, like it doesn't even exist. All right, we're coming up on the break. List to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
If you want to hear those,
all right, guys, stand by. We'll be back in a couple minutes here. How's everybody doing? All right, I'm gonna email you these links also.
Okay.
So you got the information up for the Facebook Live broadcast.
I have your.
The information that says the history of blackface.
You say it's on Facebook?
It's on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. Yes, right on the home page. There's the big 9:10 a.m. logo right there. The African History Network is up at the right there. The African History Network. That's my fan page. I have 1 million followers. That's it right there. Scroll down, and then you'll see the information. You'll see the big 9:10 a.m. logo.
All right.
That's the information for tonight's show.
That you got on.
Scroll down.
This one.
Scroll down. Scroll down. Keep going. Scroll down. That's me right there. But
Yeah,
scroll
that's
down.
it.
Scroll down. Scroll down.
Oh,
Right
this.
there. Right there.
Oh, okay.
I posted that there. That's it. So you just copy and paste that. Put that on the Facebook Live stream. That's what gets people to tune in.
Yeah.
The way people do their Facebook Live streams and the description,
Yeah.
that's not stuff that's gonna get people to tune in.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I consistently have like 1,000 or more views in my shows on 9 p.m. on Sundays. The people don't realize that.
Detail of what's coming in.
Yeah, people don't realize that. You got to promote what you're talking about.
Yeah. They just say tune in to my show.
That's not gonna get people to tune in.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. You're the only person to do that.
Well, I've been doing radio 9 years.
Because what's the name do it too? I think Bankalay will tell
Yeah,
people what
but I got more views than Bankalay.
Really? Because Bankalay.
Go look at
that
Bankalay
goes
view.
in the morning.
How many views does Bankalay have on his Facebook page consistently?
I don't know.
I consistently have over 1,000. And
I'm coming back.
How's everybody doing? Stand by.
Go ahead.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. And I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It's Sunday, 9 p.m. It's Sunday, February 10th, 2019. And we're live. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. All right, so we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. So you can watch us there, and also on 9:10 a.m. Superstation's fan page, the 9:10 a.m. Superstation Facebook fan page also. Okay, you'll see me there as well. Share these broadcasts on your Facebook page. All right, so I want to deal some with the history of blackface. All right, and we know the history of blackface goes back to during slavery. All right, and we see it basically originate in the late 1820s, right around 1828, 1829. And we see the rise of the minstrel shows, and we see a man named T.D. Rice, Thomas Dartmouth Rice, okay? So we have to understand that these characters of blackface were created to dehumanize African Americans, and they were created to dehumanize African Americans, and they were created to show us being as dim-witted, unintelligent, and also the South is making the case that slavery is a good system. They're making the case that slavery is a good system, and that the slaves are being well taken care of on the plantations by the slave masters, and that if the slaves can't take care of themselves on their own, this is why slavery needs to be maintained. These are the arguments that the South is making. Okay. All right, so if we look at an article from CNN.com, The Racist Origins of Blackface, The Racist Origins of Blackface, it talks about how blackface isn't just about painting one's skin darker or putting on a costume. It invokes a racist and painful history. The origins of blackface date back to the minstrel shows of the mid-19th century, the 1800s. And white performers darkened their skin with polish and cork, put on tattered clothing, and exaggerated their features to look stereotypically black. The first minstrel shows mimicked enslaved Africans on southern plantations, depicting black people as lazy, ignorant, cowardly, or hypersexual, to the according to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Okay, now the performances were intended to be funny to white audiences, but to the black community they were demeaning and hurtful. And once again, they're showing African Americans as being dim-witted, unintelligent, docile and obedient largely, and they are making the case that these people can't take care of themselves either. They need to be slaves. They need white people to look after them. They can't fend for themselves. All right. So these were very negative, stereotypical images, and a lot of these images still persist today. But oftentimes people don't know where they come from. So and once again, the minstrel shows are going to become the most popular form of entertainment in the country. Okay, the minstrel shows become the most popular form of entertainment in the country, not just in the South, but up north also. All right, now, one of the most popular blackface characters was Jim Crow. Jim Crow. And the Jim Crow character was developed by performer and playwright Thomas Dartmouth Rice, D-A-R-T-M-O-U-T-H, Thomas Dartmouth Rice, R-I-C-E. You may see him referred to as T.D. Rice, T.D. Rice, or also you may see him referred to as Thomas Daddy Rice as well. All right, I've seen all that because I've researched them. Now, as part of a traveling solo act, Thomas Dartmouth Rice wore a black cork blackface mask and raggedy clothing, spoke in stereotypical black vernacular, and performed a caricatured song and dance routine that he said he learned from a slave boy, a slave male, a teenage slave male or early 20s. And this is according to the University of South Florida Library. And according to the story, he sees this teenage male tending to the animals, tending to livestock. And the teenage enslaved male is singing a song. Turn around, jump around, I jump just so. Every time I turn around, I jump Jim Crow. Okay? So he's going to then, T.D. Rice is then going to create this Jim Crow character, and he does this dance on stage and imitates enslaved Africans, and white people love it. So then you have all these other men who are going to do the same thing, and this is known as the birth of the minstrel shows, and T.D. Rice is known as the father of the minstrel shows. All right? And the minstrel shows are going to become the most popular form of entertainment in the country, not just the South, but the North. It's then going to go, and when you study vaudeville, the vaudeville acts, and you study the minstrel shows, they travel across the country. All right? When radio starts, and you have radio shows in the early 1900s, this whole concept is then going to go to radio. And the most popular show that depicted this was the radio show Amos and Andy, which starts in the 1920s. Amos and Andy is created by two white men named Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll. Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll. Okay? And sometimes for promotional material, sometimes they would perform Amos and Andy in blackface as well. There's still pictures that exist of them in blackface. If you read this article from CNN, they have a picture, a promotional picture of Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll in character of Amos and Andy in blackface. And then when we look at the movie The Birth of a Nation, which we'll talk about later, if we look at the movie The Birth of a Nation, we see that the movie The Birth of a Nation, most of those people in that movie were white people in blackface as well. All right? So there's a deep history behind this. And the movie The Birth of a Nation caused race riots in the streets. And the movie depicted white men trying to rape white virgins in 1915. when you have rampant lynchings taking place in this country. Okay? So there's a deep history behind this. All right, so though early minstrel shows started in New York, they quickly spread to audiences in both the North and the South. By 1845, minstrel shows spawned their own industry. Its influence extended into the 20th century. You had Al Jolson, okay? Remember Al Jolson singing Mammy, okay? Al Jolson performed in blackface in the movie The Jazz Singer, which was a hit movie in 1927. And American actors like Shirley Temple, Judy Garland, okay? Judy Garland, mother of Liza Minnelli. Judy Garland was Dorothy in the original Wizard of Oz, okay? And we all remember seeing Shirley Temple when I remember seeing Shirley Temple when I was a little kid, just the old black and white movies of Shirley Temple and Bill Bojangles Robinson. Okay, so you had American actors like Shirley Temple and Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. They put on blackface in some of their movies also. So the characters were so pervasive that even some black performers put on blackface. Historians say one of them was Burt Williams, and Burt Williams was one of the most popular African American performers to put on blackface. All right, there's a documentary narrated by Esther Roll, who was Florida Evans on Good Times, and it's called Ethnic Notions. Ethnic Notions. Google that documentary because it deals with the whole history of a lot of these negative stereotypes and how they how we saw them depicted in media and movies and radio shows, things like this. Ethnic Notions. Okay, so the characters were so pervasive that even some black performers put on blackface, historians say. It was the only way they could work. It was the only way they could work, as white audiences were not interested in watching African American actors do anything but act foolish on stage. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is that many of our people today only want to see us act a fool on stage in music videos and movies, things like this. So you have a proliferation of negative stereotypical images in the media today. But see, when we deal with the history of the movie The Birth of a Nation, we used to protest and fight against that stuff. Today, we sit up and watch it and participate in it. We sit up and watch Love and Hip Hop, which is one of the most derogatory, degrading, degenerative, transmogrified shows on the television today. And they have franchises of Love and Hip Hop, which is designed to negatively depict African Americans, and it targets our youth and I guess millennials. And I mean that talk about dysfunction. They all need to go see Iyanla Vanzant. They all need her to fix their lives. So let's continue. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. And we're going to go to this clip from ABC News here in just a minute. And let me see. And is Nikki? Okay.
Nikki's here.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm sending that to you now. All right. So now William Henry Lane was one of these African American entertainers. Okay, he was known as Master Juba, J-U-B-A, and he was one of the first African American entertainers to perform in blackface. His shows were very popular, and he's even credited with inventing tap dance. According to John Hanner's book, it was play or starve. It was play or starve, acting in 19th century American popular theater. It was play or starve, acting in 19th century American popular theater. Now, despite Lane's relative success, Henry Lane's relative success, he was limited to the minstrel show circuit, and for most of his life performed for supper. He eventually died, quote, from something as simple and as pathetic as overwork, end quote, said John Hanner, okay, in his book. So such negative representations of black people left a damaging legacy in popular culture, especially in art and in entertainment. Minstrel shows were usually the only depiction of African American life that white audiences saw. So these were white people in blackface in general, just making fun of, ridiculing, dehumanizing African Americans for the enjoyment and pleasure of white people. Presenting enslaved Africans as the butt of jokes desensitized white Americans to the horrors of slavery. The performers also promoted demeaning stereotypes of black people that helped confirm white people's notions of superiority. So when we look at blackface, it's one of the tools of white supremacy used to not just ridicule African Americans, but to help keep us in a subservient place in society, which then reinforced white supremacy and made many white people feel superior to African Americans because they can see all these negative stereotypical images of us and see us being depicted as buffoons and things like this, right? And then when you study the Jim Crow character, now Ferris State University in Michigan has a Jim Crow museum, okay? And you can go online, you can go to Ferris State University's website, all right? And they have the Jim Crow Museum. And on their website, they deal with all these negative stereotypical images. Go to Ferris, Ferris, like Ferris Bueller, ferris.edu / Jim Crow. And you can get a lot of this history. And what happens is that the Jim Crow character, he's going to have a sidekick that's going to be created. And the sidekick's name is Zip Coon. Okay, Zipcoon, Zip Coon. And Zip Coon was, he was a free black from the North. And he was what was also known as a dandy. So he was a well-dressed African-American man. But he was designed to make fun of the enslaved Africans and to show that trying to educate them was a waste of time. Okay, so Zip Coon would try to use big words that he didn't understand, and he tried to speak intelligently, but he didn't make sense. And this was a way of Southerners saying that trying to educate African Americans, trying to teach them how to read, etc., was a waste of time, and making the argument that even if you invested all this money in trying to educate them, right, it's still not going to work. So this is why slavery is still needed, because we take care of them. Okay, they're not able to fend for themselves. So Zip Coon was the sidekick to the Jim Crow character. So when you study this was deep. Okay, this was programming. And unfortunately, many people, white and African American, don't understand this history. All right, so the performances promoted demeaning stereotypes of black people that help confirm white people's notions of superiority. Quote, by distorting the features and culture of African Americans, including their looks, language, dance, deportment, and character, white Americans were able to codify whiteness across class and geopolitical lines as its antithesis, okay? So they're showing being white as the antithesis of being these ignorant enslaved African people or an ignorant free black who's up north. So in modern discussion over blackface, its racist history is often swept under the rug or shrouded in claims of ignorance. In a 2018 segment on Megyn Kelly Today on NBC about political correctness and Halloween costumes, former NBC talk show host and host Megyn Kelly said that when she was growing up, it was seen as acceptable for a white person to dress as a black person. Okay? When was this? Now, we're not saying a white person dressing up as Michael Jackson. We're saying wearing blackface. So Reverend Al Sharpton talked about how during the 1984 Victory Tour, I think it was the Victory Tour, and Michael Jackson and his brothers were traveling across the country. He said he was the community liaison. He traveled with them, okay? And he said, we saw white kids all across the country dressed up as Michael Jackson. They had the beaded jackets on. They had the pants that were flooding. They had the white glove. He said, but none of these white kids that we saw were in blackface, imitating Michael Jackson. So it's not just dressing up, imitating African Americans. It's putting on blackface, okay? So she said Megyn Kelly said when she was growing up, it was seen as acceptable for a white person to dress as a black person. She said, quote, but what is racist? Because you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface on Halloween, or a black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Back when I was a kid, that was okay as long as you were dressed up as like a character, end quote. I'm not sure when she grew up. It wasn't, I'm not sure when she grew up, okay, but no, it wasn't acceptable. Her comments sparked widespread anger. She apologized, but her show was ultimately canceled. What show should have been canceled? She shouldn't even been on NBC in the first place. And she brought on Roland Martin to explain to her the history of blackface and all this stuff. Roland did a good job. You can watch it on his YouTube channel, Roland Martin, R-O-L-A-N-D, on YouTube. Now, white celebrities, college students, and even elected officials have made similar claims of ignorance over past and current controversies involving blackface. Now, how is it today, 2019? Some of them I can understand if they don't really understand the full history of the transatlantic slave trade, things like this. But after these instances keep coming out, how is it you still think you don't understand, oh, blackface is offensive? At least Governor Northam acknowledged that blackface is offensive. At least he realized it. Okay? Governor Northam, Ralph Northam of Virginia. Now, the article goes on to say minstrelsy, comedic performances of blackness by whites in exaggerated costumes and makeup cannot be separated fully from the racial derision and stereotyping at its core. Okay? So, yes, it's wrong, and there's a whole history behind blackface. Okay? Now, if we look at this article from abcnews.com. abcnews.com has a really good article. Virginia blackface scandals, a reminder of racist practice and its traumatic effect on African Americans. Okay, I'm going to go to this clip here, and then we're going to talk about this article. This article deals with some of the history of blackface. Let's go to this clip. Turn up so they can hear it on Facebook, please.
Oh, they can't hear it.
They need to turn up in here in the studio.
Now facing questions about a yearbook featuring racist photos and slurs. Our Chief National Affairs correspondent, Tom Yamath, is tracking it all from Richmond. And Tom, this is truly chaotic in Virginia.
That is right, Michael, and good morning. Now, Virginia's elected Democrats are still calling on Governor Northam to resign. Remember, he is a Democrat as well. But when it comes to Lieutenant Governor Fairfax and those sexual assault allegations, they're asking for more answers, some even calling for an investigation, but no one's actually taking action and launching an investigation. This morning, Virginia lawmakers trying to work through scandal after scandal, which has some asking who's in charge. Governor Ralph Northam hasn't been seen in public since Saturday, when he admitted to appearing in blackface back in 1984. And Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax accused of sexually assaulting Dr. Vanessa Tyson, a political science professor, back in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention. Dr. Tyson said the encounter left her in tears.
Do you remember Dr. Tyson ever crying? Look, it's good to see you. Remember Dr. Tyson ever crying? Good to see you guys. We're heading to session.
Fairfax, who didn't want to comment, has said the encounter was consensual and has described the allegation as part of a smear campaign. local and national Democrats, including presidential candidates, calling for an inquiry.
I think there should be an investigation to get to the bottom of it and determine the facts.
And now, a Republican having to explain something from his past. The Virginian Pilot newspaper reporting that Senate Majority Leader Thomas Norman was managing editor of the 1968 yearbook of the Virginia Military Institute, which featured several students in blackface and comments with racial slurs. Senator Norman later saying he was not in any of those photos and that he advocated for racial integration when he was at VMI.
Senator, how do you explain to Virginians that you said you supported integration at VMI in 1968, yet there were all those racist photos and slurs in that yearbook? How would you explain that to Virginians?
Well, when I was there were no ladies and there were no minorities other than Asian minorities that were there. And it was very apparent as we moved into the late 60s and into the 70s that attitudes were changing.
Now, both the governor and the lieutenant governor have issued signs that they are not resigning. As for the attorney general, you'll remember he also admitted to appearing in blackface. It seems elected Democrats are taking his apology as more sincere than the governor's because they're standing by him. Cecilia?
A lot of questions about how they're going to move forward there. Tom, thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that was from ABC News. That was on Good Morning America. Check out this article from abcnews.go.com. Virginia Blackface Scandals, a reminder of racist practice and its traumatic effect on African Americans. Now remember, it was in Virginia, August 20th, 1619, that the Dutch warship with 20-some-odd Negroes came into Jamestown, Virginia. That was in Virginia. Okay? Now, if you heard me talk before, if you were at my lecture I did Saturday in Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, dealing with Wakanda Forever, how Black Panther reconnects African Americans to African culture and history, I talked about how even though August 20th, 1619 did happen, African people, we've been in this land that we call the United States of America going back at least 51,700 years. We've been here continuously, even before Native Americans came into existence. So you should read the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, by Dr. David Imhotep, who goes deep into that history. Okay? All right, let's go quickly to the phone lines. Let's go to Larry, line 1. Larry, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from. Sandusky, Ohio. Okay.
I'll be really quick with this. Is that, Michael, I am more traumatized by the way that my parents raised me. I'm 62 years old.
Okay.
I was raised on the Little Rascals. I was raised on this whole thing about Amos and Andy, Long Rangers, and there's just a host of shows that my loving parents set me down and had me to be babysitted by the television with that type of imagery in my heart and my mind. I am not so offended about this whole thing about blackface as much as I am about how now we could do better, but we don't. These reality shows, Michael, they're worse than someone running around with minstrel shows as far as blackface. Some of this stuff that they have out now, how it depicts us as black people, as human beings, it is degrading.
It all comes out of white supremacy. It's all connected. It's not separate. It all comes out of white supremacy.
I have no doubt about that. But our role that we play in the whole thing, that's what confuses me, Michael. Thank you for taking my call, sir.
Okay, no problem. Keep listening. All right, let's go to June, line 2. June, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
You're quite welcome, and thank you for giving us that wonderful information regarding the school, the medical school where this doctor came from. Because I think that somebody, either the National Institute of Health or it's another that's investigating, they are investigating what are they teaching at that particular medical school.
Right.
We see all the time, young man, they got Ebola. They got the yellow fever, malaria, all them kind of things. Where are they getting all of these diseases from? The African countries need to get up off that 2 cents that they get put into their their pockets, and don't let those so-called doctors into their countries, because I think they're giving them the terrible things and making them sick, is what I think.
Okay. All right.
What do you think?
It depends, but I got to get back to this. I have a lot more information to get to. So it depends upon. No problem. Thanks for calling. All right. Okay, so I want to go to this article now dealing with the from abcnews.com. Virginia Blackface Scandals, a reminder of racist practice and its traumatic effect on African Americans. Okay. And you can read this article in its entirety, and it has the clip that I just played dealing with the elected officials there in Virginia. But this article also talks about some of the history of blackface, okay? And it says the blackface incidents revealed cracks in the foundation of state politics in Virginia. The tentacles of slavery run deep in this country. In Virginia in particular, the Dutch brought the first handful of slaves to be bought and sold as property on the banks of the Chesapeake. Okay. Today, what's known about the physical bondage of chattel slavery often ignores the psychological methods used to dehumanize black people. The two worked in concert from the beginning. Okay. Once again, what's known about the physical bondage of chattel slavery often ignores the psychological methods used to dehumanize black people. The two worked in concert from the beginning. Since the 1830s, blackface has projected gross animalistic representations of African Americans, the worst ideas of them, and how they are outside the sphere of humanity. So it also depicted them as being subhuman. And you're going to have the images of the mammies and the coons and things like this, the uncles, etc., the pickaninnies. And it's depicting them, even in the minstrel shows. It is depicting them also as being subhuman. And it further justifies the mistreatment and enslavement of African people. And so it was an effective tool to maintain racial boundaries and reinforce the notion that black people were ultimately inferior, experts say. When you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, Dr. Joy DeGruy in Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome talks about cognitive dissonance. And she talks about how you put negative terms and labels on people to reclassify them, to change the way people think about them, to then justify the mistreatment of these people, and absolve yourself of any, absolve your conscience of any conflict or any responsibility, because they're not human. They're subhuman, so it's okay to mistreat them. They're just slaves. It's okay to mistreat them. They're just heathens. They're not Christians. They're pagans. So it's okay to enslave them for the rest of their lives and to separate their families and to beat them and to rape them because they're not human. So you change the way that you label people. You change the names that you refer to people as to then change the way people think about them to justify their mistreatment. It's the same thing Trump does with undocumented immigrants. He calls them criminals. He says they're bringing drugs and they're raping our women and things like this. But he has them working at his golf courses in New York and New Jersey. At the same time, he's attacking undocumented immigrants. He has them working for him at his golf courses in New York and New Jersey. And if you saw A.M. Joy-Ann Reid this morning on MSNBC, she did a story of how Trump has historically employed undocumented immigrants. In the 1980s, he used them to build Trump Tower. It was undocumented Polish immigrants. Okay? So, we have to be cognizant of this history and understand how these labels are put on us. This is why I don't call brothers and sisters the N-word. This is why I don't call our sisters derogatory names. Because those terms are used to then justify the mistreatment. You don't call a sister the B word to elevate her and say, this is who I want to marry. You don't call them thoughts and all types of things like this to elevate them and put them on the pedestal. You do that to denigrate and deride them to then justify the mistreatment of them. Okay, we're coming up on a break. You listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation and Future Radio. We're going to continue when we come back from the break, and we'll deal with some of the history of the film, The Birth of a Nation, the original Birth of a Nation, which debuted February 8th, 1915, and how African Americans organized to protest and fight against this dehumanizing movie. 19 a.m. Superstation and Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
So, you've decided to go to college.
All
That's
right.
cool. So,
Stand by, everybody.
commute to college and fill your gas tank, get stuck in traffic, drive in bad weather, try to find a parking space.
How's everybody doing?
Class, or
This is Chuck.
learn online at Independence
Okay. All right. I'll let him know once you come back. Thank you.
All right. Calling numbers 313-778-7600. Yeah.
That's Chuck. He said he had to hang up earlier. He was on hold. So he gonna, he said he had a question for you. Chuck does.
All right.
When you come back from break, I'm gonna run into the. I'm gonna let you talk. I'm gonna run in the kitchen and go make my tea real quick.
All right.
I got a real back home I'm trying to get over. I don't want to start barking in here.
All right. All right, stand by, guys. How's everybody doing? Hey, calling numbers 313-778-7600. If you have a question or comment, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Then also, you can advertise with the African History Network as well. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com if you want to advertise with the African History Network. Promote your African American owned business. You could donate. Hey, can you turn that down in here a little bit, please? Yeah. You could donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show. paypal.me/the AHN show. Okay. You can donate to the African History Network, and that helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, etc. All right. And also email me if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization also. Okay, yeah, because I'm speaking, let's see, I'm speaking at the Booker Dozier Center for their Middle Passage ceremony on the 16th. I have a lot coming up. Just a second here. All right. How much time before we come back?
About 30 seconds.
All right.
Ten seconds.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It's Sunday, February 10th, 2019. Sunday, February 10th, 2019. And we're live. I want to let you know that for the month of February, I'm doing a series of lectures at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, located at 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. A new location, 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan, right off of Hamilton. And so Saturday, February 16th, I'll be doing a double lecture there. I'll deal with the history of the Rosewood Massacre in Florida of 1923. And how an entire black town was wiped out because a white woman lied. So we'll deal with the Rosewood Massacre of 1923, and then also we'll deal with a history of how African American jockeys used to dominate horse racing. African Americans used to dominate horse racing. Some of your early winners of the Kentucky Derby were black. Okay, these were black jockeys, and we were pushed out of horse racing. We were sabotaged. There was a concerted effort to push us out of horse racing. Okay, so we're going to deal with that history also. So the two remaining Saturdays in February, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, free event, donations accepted. I'll have my DVD lectures there also. So come on out. We'll get the flyer up on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, on Monday. And then I'll be speaking, let's see. Now, I'm speaking in 3 locations on Saturday, February 16th. I'm speaking at a church at 9 a.m., and I'll give you that information here in just a minute. And then also, when I leave Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, I have to head over to the Booker Dozier Center in Inkster, Michigan, 2025 Middle Belt in Inkster, Michigan, because they're having a Middle Passage commemoration and ceremony there, dealing with the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm the keynote speaker, so I'll be speaking there. So I'm speaking 3 places on Saturday, February 16th. If you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay, if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, and we'll make it happen. All right, and then also on, let's see, February 17th, Sunday, February 17th, I'll be speaking over at St. Francis Church, 7021 West Warren Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. 7021 West Warren Avenue, Detroit, Michigan, St. Francis Church, February 17th. And it starts at 4 p.m., I guess, 3 p.m. Starts at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. And they have food available for purchase. I'll have my DVD lectures there also. And I'll be speaking, dealing with African American History Month, the origins of it. We'll talk some about the film Black Panther as well. Okay? All right. So right before the break, we were dealing with some of the history of blackface. And we were talking about why blackface is offensive, but actually dealing with some of the origins of it in the history of blackface and how it ties into the history of slavery as well. And unfortunately, most African Americans, as well as white people, don't really understand the history of slavery in this country. Okay? And this is why the whole educational system, the way history is taught in the schools, this is why that has to be changed across the country, okay? And when we deal with Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Negro History Week in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt that the history of African Americans needed to be taught in every school across the country, okay? He felt the history of African Americans needed to be taught in every school across the country. All right, so let's go back to this article dealing with, and then we'll go to the phone lines in just a minute, so Chuck, stand by. Okay, let's go back to this article from abcnews.com, abcnews.go.com. Virginia Blackface Scandals, a reminder of racist practice and its traumatic effect on African Americans. Okay, and this article is from February 9th, 2019, written by Zachary Kiesch, Kiesschsch, Kiesch. And the article goes on to say, since the 1830s, blackface has projected gross, animalistic representations of African Americans, the worst ideas of them, and how they are outside the sphere of humanity. It was an effective tool to maintain racial boundaries and reinforce the notion that black people were ultimately inferior, experts say. Now, Brandy Thompson Summers is an assistant professor of African American Studies and associate executive director at the Institute of Inclusion, Inquiry, and Innovation at Virginia Commonwealth University. Okay, she said, quote, "It started being associated with presumably authentic representations of black people, specifically plantation slave culture. It was a way to mock and mark black incompetence in various areas: dance, fashion, song, language, and knowledge. The blackface character was an inept, angry, and uncontrollable in every way. The blackface character was inept, angry, and uncontrollable in every way." Now, a lot of these blackface characters are showing them as being happy and singing and dancing, things like this. And this is the way many of them are depicted in the movie The Birth of a Nation, which we'll talk about in just a minute. One of the best known performers was Thomas Dartmouth Rice, T.D. Rice. His number, Jump Jim Crow, brought this type of blackface to the mainstream stage during performances known as minstrel shows. As a result of the minstrel act, Jim Crow became a derogative slang for blacks and the slang term for Reconstruction era laws in existence through the 1960s, which codified racial segregation. This is where Jim Crow comes from. This is where the Jim Crow laws come from. It comes from the Jim Crow character created by T.D. Rice. It's about 1828, 1829. The history of blackface is complex, and it remains, and its remnants are everywhere. The history of blackface is complex, and its remnants are everywhere. Arthur Robert C. Toll, T-O-L-L, wrote in an article for American Heritage called Behind the Black Face. Behind the Black Face. He said, it is in our supermarket shelves, in our advertising, in our literature, but most of all, it is in our entertainment. From Aunt Jemima to the character of Mammy in Gone with the Wind, from Uncle Remus to Uncle Ben, from Amos and Andy to Good Times. The inexplicably grinning blackface is a pervasive part of American culture, he wrote. Only very recently have black performers been able to break out. And if you were at the lecture I did yesterday at Andy's Knowledge Cafe, 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan, I talked about how there were three main films throughout history early in the 1900s that promoted the myth of the happy slave. One was The Birth of a Nation, February 8th, 1915. The second one was Uncle Tom's Cabin, which came out about 1912. It's a black and white movie, about 30 minutes in length, Uncle Tom's Cabin, okay? And the third movie was Gone with the Wind, 1939, starring Vivian Leigh and Rhett Butler, okay? And Hattie McDaniels played the part of Mammy, the house slave. And you're going to have these different movies that promote these images of the happy slave. So then you have a lot of people in the South who think, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. They were happy. We took care of them. They were almost like part of the family. They used to sing and dance for us. And, you know, we used to be entertained. Because when you watch the movie, The Original Birth of a Nation, and it's on YouTube, it's a 3-hour movie. It's a silent movie. The movie takes place during slavery, the Civil War, and post-Civil War, which is the Reconstruction era, about 1865 to 1877. They show the slaves on the plantation dancing and performing for the slave master, okay? It takes place in Piedmont, South Carolina. Dr. Cameron is the slave master's name. And the white people are being entertained by them, right? Just like white people were entertained by minstrel shows. White people dressed up in blackface. So, quote, before the Civil War, American show business virtually excluded black people, okay? Robert C. Toll wrote in his article, American Heritage, in his article, Behind the Blackface. Before the Civil War, American show business virtually excluded black people. Now, Civil War is 1861 to 1865, so we can understand the time period that we're talking about. Quote, but it never ignored black culture. In fact, the minstrel show, the first uniquely American entertainment form, was born when northern white men blacked their faces, adopted heavy dialects, and performed. Now, Robert C. Toll added that minstrels, that the minstrel show popularity wasn't just in the Deep South. And this is what I said. It was popular up north also. Quote, the northern white public before the Civil War generally knew little about black people, but it knew that it did not welcome blacks as equals and that it did enjoy watching minstrels portray the oddities, peculiarities, and eccentricities of African Americans, of black people. Some thick red or white paint around the mouth helped to create and exaggerated the aesthetics of African Americans, showing them. So when you look at blackface, you will see them usually with white paint around the lips to exaggerate the lips. Okay? And it wasn't uncommon to see actors wear short, curly wigs to imitate the texture of black hair and tattered clothes to convey a disheveled appearance. Because they're dressing up looking like slaves, looking like they're poor. Even today, Gucci was pressured to pull sweaters that resembled blackface makeup. The company later apologized and said it was committed to diversity. Now, Jeffrey Blount, B-L-O-U-N-T, an author, journalist, and professor at George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs, said the images denigrating African Americans were effective in shaping social and political discourse around what it means to be black. They were also instrumental in policies that were put in place, laws that were passed as well. He said, quote, "Blackface in America is homegrown propaganda. Blackface in America is homegrown propaganda, a visual element of domestic terrorism," end quote. The images and skits characterizing black Americans as lazy, ignorant, and hypersexual resonated with audiences. Quote, "Frederick Douglass and other black leaders highlighted the intellectual capabilities of their people, yet the image of a doofus in blackface is what many whites preferred as the dominant representation of African Americans and their culture." Let me repeat that. Frederick Douglass and other black leaders highlighted the intellectual capabilities of African people. Yet the image of a doofus in blackface is what many whites preferred as the dominant representation of African Americans and their culture. Okay, Jeffrey Blount said. Now, Frederick Douglass also criticized the concept of blackface performers stealing a, quote, complexion denied them by nature, end quote, to make money and perpetuate stereotypes. So he's talking about white people dressing up in blackface, okay, mocking African Americans and our complexion, and they're doing this for money, perpetuating stereotypes which are harmful and detrimental to the existence of African people. The mask of blackface today has not changed much from its roots. Burnt cork and grease were used to darken the skin. Or, as Governor Ralph Northam said in describing dressing up like Michael Jackson during a performance in the 1980s, quote, "a little shoe polish on my cheeks," end quote. Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring, he said he and friends, quote, "dressed up and put on wigs and brown makeup," end quote, singing songs in an apparent effort to emulate Curtis Blow and other rappers of the 1980s. Now, Jeffrey Blount addressed the question, as some have asked, whether dressing up as a member of another race but not donning what is historically seen as blackface is offensive and related or separate. He said, yes, it is. While it isn't the equivalent of blackface, appropriation of other cultures in terms of dress is offensive. In the last couple of years, some artists have gotten in trouble dressing from other cultures in their videos. Okay, let's go to the and you could read the rest of this article. They talk about Ted Danson dressing up in blackface back in the day when he used to be with Whoopi Goldberg. Never understood that relationship. Well, let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Chuck, line 1. Chuck, thanks for calling. Chuck, thanks for calling back in. Welcome to the African History Network show. Let people know where you're calling from. Chuck, are you there? Okay, I don't hear Chuck. Chuck, can you hear me? You're on the air. Okay, let's go to line 2. Let's go to Tony, line 2. We'll come back to Chuck. Tony, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
She's hung up.
Tony hung up? Okay, Tony, call back in.
No. Hey, okay, here you go. Hold on.
Okay, let's go back to Chuck, line 1. Chuck, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm calling from Detroit.
Hey, Tony, I'm sorry.
And I really appreciate you, Brother Hotep.
Okay.
And I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. You're very admirable, and really appreciate the information.
Thank you.
My question is, with all that's been said and done, I mean, do you think it's natural for each one of us as human beings to have the challenge when it comes to ethnicity? Because, like you say, you know, the language, you know, the dialect, you know, and things like that, the different complexions and pigmentations and ethnicities, cultures and traditions. I mean, you know, there's got to be a root somewhere, you know, like how it got started and the purpose of the challenge. Like, it's like World Olympics, you know, and to me, and I would appreciate it, you know. I mean, some of us are not able to read, you know, or understand some of the language, you know, in particular.
Okay.
And I was wondering if maybe you can kind of like breeze through that, you know, a bit, if it's not taking too much of your time. Help us. And
what's the question?
The question is, you know, what is your view on pretty much, I would say, the journey of life, the purpose of existence, and the challenges that we go through with the differences that's here and present throughout the world.
Okay. All right, thanks. I'll try to answer that. Thanks for calling, Chuck. All right, so that comes through obtaining knowledge and understanding an African concept of spirituality, cosmology being the understanding of the universe as an orderly system. You're here on earth to obtain knowledge, and you're here on earth to be in harmony with nature. And through the acquisition of knowledge and spiritual awakening, you come to understand the powers of the Creator that exists inside of you. This is coming from an African concept, not a European concept, because coming from a European concept, coming from a Christian European concept specifically, you're taught that you have to go through intermediaries to get through to the Creator, and you're taught that you're born in sin. That's coming from a European Christian concept coming out of their ecumenical councils, which start in 325 AD. The African concept is entirely different. Okay, the African concept is understanding that you are part of an orderly system and you are part of nature, and you're not here to dominate nature. You're here to be in harmony with nature, and you acquire knowledge. So in Genesis, we're told that Adam and Eve, in the story, quote unquote story, we're told that they were told by God not to eat of the tree of knowledge because they would become likened unto a god. That's the whole purpose. That's what you're supposed to do. Because when you understand an African concept of spirituality, we are God having a human experience. So when and it was called the tree of knowledge. It wasn't called the tree of ignorance. It was called the tree of knowledge. You are supposed to acquire knowledge to elevate your conscious level. This is what the Karest is, the rising of the spirit, the Karest. In Greek, they call it Christos. In English, you call it Christ. Christ is a title, not a name. So we're told that Christ means anointed, or the anointed one, but it comes from Christos, which is Greek, which comes from the Karest. K-A-R-S-T, Karest, meaning the rising of the spirit. It's the awakening of the consciousness. So we have to reclaim what was taken away from us. Let's go to Tony, line 2. Tony, welcome back to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from.
Detroit. Thanks for taking my call, Michael.
You're welcome.
Great show. So, regarding the
Oh, you know what? We're up against a break. Hold it right there, Tony. I realize we're up against a break. Mandatory break. Stand by. We'll come back right to you. Listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. Superstation. Future Radio. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Are you trying
stand by, guys?
Struggling just to make
I realized we up against a break.
It did come real quick. I had just looked and it was like 17.
Yeah.
I was trying to count it down. Minutes went by quick.
All right, stand by, guys. We'll be back in 2 minutes here. Hey, we have the bundle pack, the Africans who were here before Columbus bundle pack, and you get you get the DVD lecture I did with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book "The First Americans Were Africans: Documented Evidence." You get the lecture I did with Professor Kaba Kamene, Booker T. Coleman, dealing with Africa and the Mississippi Valley and Mexico, things like this. Also, you get the Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust by Dr. John Henry Clark. You get that lecture. And there's also a lecture from Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus. Okay? So that's an 8 DVD bundle pack, the Africans that were here before Columbus. And we posted the link here on the thread of the broadcast. That's at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com.
$35 seconds.
All right. Then there's also another 8 DVD bundle pack we have, Breaking the Chains bundle pack. Okay? The Breaking the Chains bundle pack. And this also deals with the history of African American History Month. We'll post that link there. That's on sale, $50, regularly $80.
Three, two, one.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, February 10th, 2019. We're here every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, okay? We have all of my DVD lectures there. You can sign up for the online courses. We have online courses on demand, including Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, okay? Coming up Saturday, February 16th, I'm speaking in 3 places. I'm at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., 71 Oakman Avenue, doing a double lecture dealing with the history of the Rosewood Massacre of 1923, January 1923, the Rosewood Massacre. We know there was a movie made about it by John Singleton, director John Singleton, in 1997. Okay, we have that. Then also I'll do a presentation dealing with how African-American jockeys, African-American jockeys used to dominate horse racing. Okay, because a lot of the early winners of the Kentucky Derby were African-American jockeys, and some of them were former slaves. The first winner of the Kentucky Derby was Oliver Lewis. He was a 19-year-old African-American man. But we were systematically pushed out of horse racing, okay? And a lot of people don't know this history. We were systematically pushed out of horse racing. There was a lot of jealousy, and white men wanted to take the prize money, etc. So I'm going to deal with that history, okay? That's at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe, 71 Oakman Avenue, Highland Park, Michigan, right off of Hamilton, Saturday, February 16th, 2019. Free event, donations accepted, all right? And then also I'm speaking at the Booker Dozier Center in Inkster, Michigan on Saturday, February 16th. So I had to leave Highland Park, drive out to Inkster. They are doing a Middle Passage ceremony and a Middle Passage commemoration at the Booker Dozier Center, 2025 Middle Belt Road in Inkster, Michigan. Okay, so I'm the keynote speaker there, and I'm speaking at a church Saturday morning, 9 a.m., and I'm trying to find that information here for you. Also, I'll get that to you here in just a minute. But in the meantime, let's go back to line 2. Let's go back to Tony, line 2. Thanks for holding. Go ahead with your question or comment, Tony.
Okay, so you were talking about the blackface. The first imagery of clowns, you know, with the tattered clothes and the knapsack and the makeup on the face, exaggerated makeup. Wasn't that a continuation of the blackface phenomenon?
The hobos.
The hobos, the clown hobo thing, and then the evolution of the clown.
Now they have white face. They have white face, right? Those images have white face.
Not initially, and then it evolved into the white face, and then there's been like the evolution of the clown. But I think it started with the blackface imagery and the tattered clothes, and you know, just being downtrodden.
Yeah, I think there's a connection there. Yeah, it's going to start with the blackface, and then you're going to have the hobos and things like this, but they're wearing tattered torn clothing. So I think there's a connection there. I've seen some information on that before, but I think there's a connection there.
My follow-up: why do you think our people just flock to Gucci and Prada and Marshino's to buy high-price ticket items, and they don't market to us? They disparage us in their advertising. Why do you think that is so like the conspicuous consumption amongst, you know, certain elements in the black community?
Because it's shown to us in hip hop videos, and it's in hip hop music, so it gets marketed. It gets marketed to us. It gets marketed to us like that, and the marketing is repetitive because you're going to listen to a Cardi B song, okay, more times than you'll see the advertising for Gucci or something like that, or for Red Bottoms.
True. Real quick, you remember the book by J.A. Rogers, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro?
Yes.
Was proof. I had that book. I bought it twice, and it's a real good resource. And I can't find it. Do you think it's still in print, or I could get access?
Probably get it in Andy's Knowledge Cafe. Cafe. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Michael.
Okay. Take care. All right. Quickly, let's go to John, line 3. John, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from the east side of Detroit. Hotep, thank you for some smart and intelligent history.
Oh, thank you.
And that could go 1,000 miles, and I hope folks listening and taping it. Hotep, you describe the way them Jim Crow with the pictures of the African American. And I seen they showed a history of Griffith, the Nazis, and the whole ticket. He had to get the picture from Jim Crow to the little class. So the picture, just like they were doing the Jews. They were classifying as.
Is a picture of what?
And rats, and everything. They were no good. And they were beat you out a penny. And I mean, the picture. The way you decided when Jim Crow was had his picture of African American, he had to get it from the United States. No question about it.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about, John? What are you talking about? Got what picture?
Nazi Germany. They showed how Nazi Germany, the picture, the Jews when Hitler was there, made small and talked about them, how they was vermin, they were rats,
right.
They were no good, and so forth.
Kind of like the way Donald Trump talks about undocumented immigrants, even though he has them working for him at his golf courses and golf clubs.
Exactly, that's right. And,
right.
I remind you, they caught one of the Canadians today with $18,000 worth of what you call it, fentanyl. They call it
fentanyl, yeah.
So, I mean, I got hope here about that, the whole thing.
Right.
Thank you, man.
Okay.
Thank you very much, okay.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks for calling. All right. We'll go back to the phone lines in just a minute. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. If you like this type of information, you want to donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, etc., pay the bills. Also, you can go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Now, we have an 8 DVD bundle pack, the Breaking the Chains bundle pack. It features 8 of my DVD lectures, including one dealing with the history of African American History Month. That's an online promotion at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, the 8 DVD bundle pack. And we'll post the link for it here on the thread of the broadcast, and also on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. So it's on sale, $50. I think it's regularly something like $130, something like that. Okay, but the Breaking the Chains bundle pack. All right, it includes a presentation I did dealing with the history of Confederate monuments, also the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. The Breaking the Chains video I did dealing with the history of African American History Month and why it was created, and exposing myths in our history. Also includes Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. Okay, so that's on sale right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We also have the 8 DVD bundle pack, the Africans that were here before Columbus, the Africans that were here before Columbus. And that includes a double lecture I did with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. It includes a lecture from Dr. John Henry Clark, the Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. Also includes one from Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote They Came Before Columbus. Okay? All right. So check that out at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, the Africans that were here before Columbus. All right, so right before the break, I was sharing with you this article from abcnews.go.com entitled Virginia Blackface Scandals, a Reminder of Racist Practice and Its Traumatic Effect on African Americans. Virginia Blackface Scandals, a Reminder of Racist Practice and Its Traumatic Effect on African Americans. Okay? So check out the rest of that article in its entirety. They have a lot of history information there. And they talk about Bert Williams as well. They said, so let's see. Thompson Summers added, okay, so they were saying that, yes, it is offensive when other races appropriate other cultures in terms of dress. That's offensive. In the last couple of years, some artists have gotten in trouble dressing from other cultures in their videos. Thompson Summers added that, quote, racial identity is never a costume, end quote. Emulating someone is fine, but there's no reason to darken the skin. There are so many other ways to accessorize yourself. As the appeal for blackface began to fall off in the 20th century, okay, the 1900s, its use has become more controversial, but not unheard of. Ben Vereen, actor, entertainer, Ben Vereen, who we saw in Roots as Chicken George, attempted using blackface to depict the pain of the marginalization of black entertainers, specifically Bert Williams, who I talked about a little while ago, who was forced to perform in blackface during the early 20th century. The telecast cut off the performance before the end when it aired, and as a result, an ironic portrayal became a caricature, the opposite of his intent. Okay, so you can check out the rest of this article also. We'll post the link on the thread of the broadcast on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. All right, so February 8th, this past week, February 8th was the anniversary of the movie The Birth of a Nation debuting. Okay, the debut of the film The Birth of a Nation. All right, and a lot of people don't know the history about the movie The Birth of a Nation. Okay, so History.com has a really good article about this, and we used to fight against depictions of us. Okay, we used to, when this movie came out, there were protests that we led against the movie The Birth of a Nation. All right, so on February 8th, 1915, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, a landmark film in the history of cinema, premieres at Clunes Auditorium in Los Angeles, California. The silent film was America's first feature-length motion picture and a box office smash. And during its unprecedented 3 hours, D.W. Griffith popularized countless filmmaking techniques that remain central to the art today. Okay, this was a landmark movie. Okay, this was the most expensive movie at the time, and this was also the longest movie at the time. It was 3 hours. It was 3 hours in length. All right, so let's continue. However, because of its explicit racism, Birth of a Nation is also regarded as one of the most offensive films ever made. Actually titled The Klansman for its first month of release, but they spell Klansman with a C. Okay? Actually titled The Klansman for its first month of release, the film provides a highly subjective history of the Civil War, Reconstruction, and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Studied today as a masterpiece of political propaganda, Birth of a Nation caused riots in several cities and was banned in other cities, but was seen by millions. Okay? So, David Wark Griffith, W-A-R-K. This is where the D-W comes from. His name was David Wark Griffith. He was born in LaGrange, Kentucky in 1879, 10 years after slavery ended, same year Dr. Carter G. Woodson was born. He was the son of an ex-Confederate colonel. His father died when he was 7 years old, and he later dropped out of high school to help support his family. After holding various jobs, he began a successful career as a theater actor. He wrote several plays and, on the advice of a colleague, sent some scenarios for one-reel films to the Edison Film Company and the Biograph Company. The Edison Film Company and the Biograph Company. Now, in 1908, he was hired as an actor and writer for the Biograph Studio and soon was promoted to a position as director. Between 1908 and 1913, D.W. Griffith made more than 400 short films for Biograph, okay, the Biograph Company. Between 1908 and 1913, he made more than 400 short films. With the assistance of his talented cinematographer, G.W. Billy Bitzer, B-I-T-Z-E-R, he invented or refined such important cinematic techniques as the close-up, the scenic long shot, the moving camera shot, and the fade in and fade out. His contributions to the art of editing during this period included the flashback and parallel editing, in which two or more separate scenes are intermixed to give the impression that the separate actions are happening simultaneously. He also raised the standard on movie acting, initiating scene rehearsals before shooting and assembling a stock company of film professionals. Many of these actors including Lillian and Dorothy Gish, G-I-S-H, Mary Pickford, Mae Marsh, and Lionel Barrymore. They went on to become some of Hollywood's first movie stars. Taking his cue from the longer spectacle films produced in Italy, in 1913, D.W. Griffith produced Judith of Bethulia, a biblical adaptation that at 4 reels, R-E-E-L-S, 4 reels, was close to an hour long. It was his last Biograph film. 2 years later, he released his epic 10-reel masterpiece, Birth of a Nation, for Mutual Films. Now, Birth of a Nation was based upon a novel called The Klansman by a man named Thomas Dixon, okay? And the novel The Klansman tells the turbulent story of American history in the 1860s, as it followed the fictional lives of two families from the North and the South. Throughout its 3 hours, African Americans are portrayed as brutish, lazy, morally degenerate, and dangerous. In the film's climax, the Ku Klux Klan rises up to save the South from the Reconstruction era prominence of African Americans in Southern public life. Riots and protests broke out at screenings of the movie The Birth of a Nation in a number of northern cities, and the recently formed NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, embarked on a major campaign to have the film banned. They embarked on a major campaign to have the film banned. It eventually was censored in several cities, and D.W. Griffith agreed to change or cut out some of the film's especially offensive scenes. Nevertheless, millions of people happily paid to witness the spectacle of Birth of a Nation, which featured a cast of more than 10,000 people and a dramatic storyline far more sophisticated than anything released to that date. For all the gross historical inaccuracies, certain scenes such as meetings of Congress, Civil War battles, and the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln were meticulously recreated, lending the film an air of legitimacy that made it so effective as propaganda. The Ku Klux Klan, who were suppressed by the federal government in the 1870s, was refounded in Georgia in December 1915 by William J. Simmons. It's because the film The Birth of a Nation helped to rejuvenate the Ku Klux Klan. In addition to being anti-black, the new Klan was anti-Catholic and anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant. And by the early 1920s, it had spread throughout the North as well as the South. At the peak of its strength in 1924, membership in the KKK is estimated to have been as high as 3 million. There is no doubt that the movie The Birth of a Nation played no small part in winning wide public acceptance for an organization that was originally founded as an anti-black and anti-federal terrorist group. And the History Channel has a documentary dealing with how the Ku Klux Klan helped empower the mafia, especially the Italian mafia, because the Ku Klux Klan advocated for prohibition in the 1920s. And it's prohibition that's going to give rise also to the mafia with bootleggers, Al Capone and things like this, right? So they have a documentary that deals with this, okay? And they may have it at their website, history.com. You can check on it. But it deals with how the Ku Klux Klan inadvertently empowered the mafia. And also, back at this time, the Klan, they were against, they didn't like German immigrants. A lot of these white immigrants, Italian immigrants, Greek immigrants, things like this, the Klan didn't like them. You had to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, at least 16 years old, to join the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, they didn't let Catholics join. They didn't let Jews join. And the Klan also targeted white Republicans. They didn't like white Republicans either, because the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, and it's going to be the Civil War that ends slavery. So they didn't like Republicans. And when you look at the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, it's going to be the fact that the Republican Party starts to ignore the issues and concerns of African Americans. And in 1928, you're going to have the Lily White movement that starts in the Republican Party, basically pushed and led by Herbert Hoover, who's the Republican candidate for president in 1928. He's running against a Northern Democrat named Al Smith. This is going to be the beginning of African Americans to start leaving the Republican Party and going to the Democratic Party, because the Republican Party were ignoring our issues and especially they were ignoring our concerns about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, this was going, so our our concerns were falling on deaf ears, and we're being pushed out of the Republican Party, and we find the Democratic Party, even though we're leery of them, we find them more receptive, and a lot of African Americans like President Franklin Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor Roosevelt. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Otis, line 1. Welcome to the African History Network show. Otis, thanks for calling. Tell us where you're calling from.
Yeah, Otis Mathis calling from African Town, 4217824 in South Detroit. Listen to you on 910.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I was listening to you talking about how people select, especially young people select their clothing very expensive by how they see these rappers and entertainment. So even though there's no benefit of marketing,
yeah, that's the influence. Yeah, that's the influence. Mm-hmm.
Well, what was the influence back? And I look at old pictures of my parents in 1928 forward up until maybe the early 70s before Soul Train and all that came out. What was the influence on them dressing in gaiters and suits? They didn't call them designer suits, but they wasn't concealed suckers. They knew seersuckers was you didn't buy them, you bought the quality suit, even though there was no marketing in African communities then. They were dressing like that.
You're going to have influence from other people we saw in our community, entertainers that we saw, things like this in our community. You'll see that. Even in like some, I'm not exactly sure which magazines at that time. You talking about the 1920s?
It may have been in the 20s. My father, because my father was born in 1928, and I see pictures of him, as a young adult in his early, when he came home from the service, about 20 years old, so about 1948 and later. You can see pictures of him in suits, gangster hats. And I think when you said that, they do make sense, because even in the 20s, the entertainers couldn't live in the white communities. They were trapped in the black communities. They was hanging out in the black bars, hotels, and they dressed well. So I didn't think about it like that.
Well, we'll see entertainers. Yeah, we'll see entertainers influence the way we dress, but also many of us dress more like men. Women dress more like women. You didn't see brothers walking around with pants hanging off their behinds. You didn't see brothers. They weren't running around wearing jerseys. They're wearing suits. They dress to impress the ladies, but they dress like men. They wore hats. You go look at those pictures from the 1930s, 40s, 50s. You don't see brothers walking around with their pants hanging off their behind. You don't see brothers walking around with their pants around their thighs.
Right, well, because my father and uncles and them were sharp, and those little towns in Pennsylvania, they was even sharp. In the mountains of Memphis, they were suited now.
Right.
But you think that was because that was the dress style? If pants hanging down back in the 20s and 30s, they would have selected.
Well, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been tolerated because we had better standards. It would not have been tolerated. It would not have been tolerated. No.
Because I know my son never wore, because it wasn't tolerated. He's 42 now. It wasn't tolerated in our home.
Right.
So you don't see a picture of all the pictures. He loved taking pictures.
Right.
And all the pictures coming up through even high school, you don't see his pants hanging.
Right.
In his early 20s, but that was something was not tolerated. If he bought them, we burned them. And
right.
So he just kind of got hooked to it. Ain't no sense of me having that fight. And even today at 40, you see his dress is more still upline, more, he got dressed, and you see older gentlemen at his age when they do his hands in.
Right.
That's a surprise too.
Right. Well, they're trying to imitate some of the younger guys when they should be setting an example. They should be setting an example, and they're trying to imitate them.
The 20s and 30s, that imitation was the entertainers and fans who couldn't live in the white community, the white neighborhood, so they were in the black community. So our black parents and them saw them when they went to clubs or saw them walking the street or the entertainment. It was always in.
Right. All right, Otis, I got to get this other call because we're almost out of time. Thanks for calling. All right, let's go to Francis, line 2. Francis, welcome to the African History Network show. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, they even had cartoon characters in Blackface.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a child, that characters, they had real black faces, big white lips and white eyes. And, Walt Disney's cartoons were notorious for that because he used to have these characters with these black clothes, sitting in a tree, laughing and talking. They had black face and big red teeth. and they were talking real ignorant. So,
Right.
That's just been blamed.
Well, absolutely, yeah. There's a history of that, absolutely.
So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling. All right, so read this article from History.com, official website of the History Channel. February 8th, 1915, Birth of a Nation opens. And they go on to say, at the peak of its strength in 1924, membership in the KKK is estimated to have been as high as 3 million. There is no doubt that Birth of a Nation played no small part in winning wide public acceptance for an organization that was originally founded as an anti-black and anti-federal terrorist group. Of D.W. Griffith's later films, Intolerance in 1916 is the most important. And they go on to say that he went on to make 27 films, 27 more films after the Birth of a Nation. In 1919, the year after World War I ends, D.W. Griffith founded United Artists Studios with Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin. They went on to found United Artists Studios. Okay, if you read the book How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, they talk about the movie The Birth of a Nation, and they deal with how Louis B. Mayer was the man who distributed the movie. He took the profits that he made from distributing the movie Birth of a Nation. He teamed up with two other men named Metro and Goldwyn, and they formed Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios, MGM Studios. Okay, read How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. All right, so if we look very quickly, because we run out of time, we may have to deal with some of this next week. William Monroe Trotter, William Monroe Trotter's boycott of the Birth of a Nation laid the foundation for the civil rights movement. This is an article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Because William Monroe Trotter, when the movie comes to Boston, he leads protests against the movie. The NAACP leads protests against the movie also. There's a documentary from Independent Lens on PBS called Birth of a Movement. Birth of a Movement. And PBS.org has an article from February 2nd, 2017. Filmmakers tell story of William Trotter's fight against racist silent blockbuster. Filmmakers tell story of William Trotter's fight against racist silent blockbuster. And this deals with William Monroe Trotter fighting against the movie The Birth of a Nation. TheRoot.com has an article from May 1st, 2015. How Black America rallied to stop the racist film Birth of a Nation. And it talks about 100 years ago, on March 3rd, 1915 to be exact, a war consumed Europe and the United States tried to steer clear of entanglements because the U.S. didn't get involved in World War I basically till 1917. Some of the best minds and most passionate social justice advocates had one goal: to stop the opening of D.W. Griffith's movie The Birth of a Nation at the Liberty Theater in New York City's Times Square. Charlotta Bass, BASS, editor of the West Coast's oldest newspaper, black newspaper, the California Eagle, had sounded the alarm some days before in a telegram to NAACP headquarters warning about a hideous film that was wowing white film goers in Los Angeles, California, despite efforts to have it banned. Leaders of the 6-year-old New York-based organization, the NAACP, led mainly by white philanthropists, sprang into action. Through lobbying, letter writing, and litigation, they spearheaded a campaign that for most of the rest of the year saw them and their allies in the black press trying to outrun the publicity juggernaut that turned The Birth of a Nation into the talk of the nation. Charlotta Bass and her husband, Joe, had been onto the story for about a decade since Thomas Dixon's novel The Klansman had become a play that eventually became the movie The Birth of a Nation. If you read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., in the back of the book it has a chronology of history. Go to 1906. In 1906, the play The Klansman came to Philadelphia, and you had 3,000 African Americans who protested against the play, The Klansman, in 1906. We know that the NAACP led protests against the movie The Birth of a Nation, right? But today the NAACP gives image awards to the TV show Empire, which is the birth of a nation of its day. That looks like a minstrel show. That shows derogatory, demeaning, denigrating images of African Americans, promoting criminality and promiscuity, and they use hip hop and music to hook you, to get you to tune in each week to see this minstrel show called Empire on the Fox network, the Fox TV network owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owns the Fox cable network that attacks African Americans on a daily basis. So we'll deal with some of this next week. I'll see you all at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe Saturday, February 16th, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we'll get the information. I was trying to find it, but we'll get the information for the upcoming screenings of the next installments of African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, also at the that the city of Inkster is doing, okay, because they have 28 days of African American events for African American History Month. Visit their website, cityofinkster.com, right on the home page. Click on events. Hopefully they have it up there. Actually, I think I found the calendar here because they sent me a calendar. So February 12th, okay, they're going to be at Christ Temple City of Refuge, 27741 Carlisle Street in Inkster, Michigan. That's 6 p.m. I'll be there because I'm leading the discussion, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. That's for part 3. And then part 4 is Thursday at High Praise Cathedral, 4010 Moore Street in Inkster. But we'll try to get this, see if they can put together a flyer, get it at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, thanks for listening to the African History Network show, 9 10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. Right now, it's corrects wrong behaviors, not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. All right. All right, guys, we got to get out of here. Talk to y'all later. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And if you want me to do a presentation for your group or organization, email me at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right? Talk to y'all later. Peace.